does the music industry still need the music press? Do artists care about getting press coverage anymore? I guess the most existential question is, does the press still help break artists? Because from all the evidence I've seen in recent years, something has crumbled or broken as audiences shift to where they follow publications. They're not picking them up in shops and devouring every page. They are seeing what appears in their feeds, and they might follow 20 different publications but rarely see posts from them. People don't go to homepages as much. People have a very different relationship with their media consumption, and those people are also those musicians, and the idea of being covered by certain publications doesn't mean as much as it once did. So I thought I'd speak to someone from a new generation, someone whose tips and advice to artists pop up in my TikTok all the time, and I think she's got a really good set of values and approaches to how artists can connect to audiences and cut through in the modern world. Atlanta's a consultant and a coach and an artist manager, and I think, as you'll find, her journey from running fan sites to now helping hundreds of artists get started in their careers is pretty inspiring. But also, there is not necessarily some great news in here if you think the music press is the most important thing ever, because not everyone agrees. So my idea was to do a series about the state of music journalism, but as someone that's managing artists and running a label again, I've just discovered how hard it is to get new artist coverage. Like, all the spaces that used to be there have disappeared. The stuff that is out there that you can get doesn't really have any impact. I spent a load of money on Groover and Submit Hub to get onto playlists, and most of them generated 2 plays. Like, literally went through a list of, I think we got into 300 playlists, and almost all of them generated 2 plays. And it feels like the music press used to be really helpful to filter music and help break artists. And now I don't really know which journalists I would trust to recommend me music, which bloggers I would trust, which promoters I would trust even. And it just feels like things are a bit lost. And I thought, as someone who is literally coaching artists as well as managing artists, like, your perspective seems like it would be quite unique, because you've obviously worked in majors at a point when press was pretty key. And now stepping outside of it, sort of, how do you see things? So that was a very long meandering interlude, but I'm sure there's probably enough in there just to talk for half an hour. But whereabouts do you think the music press is in terms of importance in most of the conversations that you have with artists and labels and managers and the like?
Yeah, no, I definitely am with you. So it's such an interesting landscape, I think, because, like you said, I've been in the industry when press was, it was paramount. And, we had Drowned in Sound, we had Line of Best Fit, we had Pigeons and Planes, Pitchfork, like they were huge blogs at the time. And I even remember there was like one aggregator as well that would kind of almost like rank you depending on how many blogs you got on. And
Hype Machine.
It was Hype Machine, right. And I remember just like being a student and scouring Hype Machine for new music, and that was my main source. That, and then like SoundCloud to an extent, but it's definitely, I think what it's probably stemmed from is the rise in different apps and technology, which has ultimately changed consumer behavior and how consumers discover new music. And really, if we think about it, like the way I look at it is that we have almost like 2 separate pools to music consumerism. You have everyone that's essentially obsessed with music, and that's the majority of people are musicians themselves, artists themselves, and like your ride or die hardcore music fans. I'm not talking about stans of artists who are just artist specific, music fans. And I would also like to think the majority of the music industry, people that work in the industry, are also intense music fans. Then you have this like whole other pool.
Although annoyingly, you can often Annoyingly, often you can have a longer conversation about football in some meetings than music with some people in the
So
industry.
true. So, yeah, I know. That's why I always kind of have to caveat is
Yeah,
like, hopefully,
yeah,
because I know
yeah.
that's not everyone. I know there are very much
Mm,
people who are in the thick of the industry who literally just aren't core music fans, which is wild to me. But then there's this whole other pool to music consumerism, which is pretty much just like passive music listeners. And they are people who like to be told what to listen to, and they like it to be served to them with ease. And I'm talking about like going onto Spotify, hitting play on New Music Friday, or hitting play on like today's Office playlist and just letting it run on shuffle. And then from that, they might pick up, oh yeah, that's a new song that I keep hearing on the radio, or like, oh, that's an artist that I actually might decide to go and finally check out. It's kind of the rush of music discoverism now is it's completely changed to how it used to be. And the bottom line, what I have found, especially through coaching, I mean, I've done it for a year now, and I've probably coached, I think I ran the numbers, it was something like over 400 artists one-to-one
wow.
around
Yeah.
the world. So I've had quite an interesting perspective come back to me from artists at completely various levels, with different opinions, different genres, different struggles. The overarching struggle for all of them, and they all ask me, is how to crack social media. How do I build an audience? How do I do this? Very few will say, should I get press? Should I hire a publicist? And there are some that do ask me that. And the bottom line is, which I have to sit there and say, I'm like, you have to reverse engineer this, right? What do you want to achieve by getting press in today's world? If it's an audience, probably not going to happen. And there are agencies, publicist agencies that are charging. I was just looped in on one the other day, 1,500 for a 6 to 8 week single campaign for publicity.
Yeah.
And if you're an independent artist, you have to look at that as return of investment. And really, how many more eyes and ears are you going to get on your artist project if you hand over that money to get a few tastemaker blogs in reality, versus if you spend that money on your content or digital marketing? What's that return on investment going to look like for your audience? And most artists want the audience, which I get, right? Without your fans, you're not really going to be able to do a lot. So I think that's the struggle. That's why we see blogs now having to charge for placements, because I would presume, and again, you may also know more than me, but from my perspective, I can see is that there are less eyes on these blogs now. So in terms of running ads, that is falling. So to make up for lost costs, they're going to charge for placements to secure press for almost anybody and everybody.
Yeah. Which
I've
removes then the value of a recommendation from a blog, because
exactly,
it's not necessarily down to taste, it's down to who can afford it. It's a bit like the justice system, it's only there for the people that can afford it.
Yeah, I know, and it's completely unbalanced. And then because of that now, and I get it, because sites that are still running, they have to adapt and they still have to make some sort of revenue to stay afloat. But because of that, it now is in turn, now anybody and everybody who has a bit of cash can essentially pay to get featured on your next hit list or whatever. The credibility is almost going down and down and down the gutter. And the only reason I, as manager, would invest in press at this stage for my artists would be A, if we got outside funding, and B, it would be to get further credibility. So we can essentially screenshot that and put it on social media, and then use that as our further leverage for pitching to playlists, for editorial playlists.
And there is, I think there is definitely I think there's definitely is that ecosystem still, and I think it always used to be the way. Like, you'd get one good bit of press, and then you sort of show other press, look, we've had this good bit of press, do you want to do something? And with radio, you'd send them an update on what's happened at press. For Jules Holland or something, you'd send them that update. And I think there was an authority to kind of like the credibility of being recommended by journalists and publications. And like one of the artists I manage and work with, we just had really great Sunday Times review, and that still really means something to a certain type of person in the industry. whether off the back of a review in the Sunday Times we sold many more records is a, like, without it being racked to the front of HMV, we're probably not going to get that same knock-on impact of what that would have been 10, definitely 15 years ago. So let's just rewind a little bit and introduce you, because I think if you're like the TikTok hook of having to say who you are after 5 seconds, we'll do like 5 to 8 minutes on this podcast. Yeah. So you've worked in the industry for over a decade. You got an internship at Sony when you first started out. Do you want to talk me through kind of your journey? You can start from before that if you like, but sort of like how you've ended up where you are today and who you work with, that kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah. So, okay, I'll keep it as brief as possible because it's such a wild story, really, how I got started. And I got started really, really young. When I say over, I look back, this must be around 12 or so years now, really, in total. So my first job in the industry, I was 15. And that was at London Fashion Week with Tabitha Downham, at the time was Florence Machine's creative director. And if we rewind it a little bit further as to how I got my first job,
she was one of the queens of noise, wasn't she?
She was, yes, yeah, part of kind of that love management world with Mairead Nash. Very much like that scene with like Grimmy, and kind of like the Camden kids, kind of like, it was like such a cool scene that I only ever aspired to be a part of when I was like 14. So I was kind of grown up, and I was at school, and I had always wanted to do music, but I was more of a musician at this point. I was playing guitar, bass, drums, keys, writing my own songs, being in bands, doing the music thing. And it was kind of at the time where it was the rise of Justin Bieber and JLS, and stan culture was booming on Twitter, but it wasn't necessarily referred to as stan culture. It was just super fans. And my friends at the time, they started running, like Bieber Army Twitter pages and JLS Army Twitter pages. And I had just discovered this artist, this little known artist with a song called Rabbit Heart out that I had bought off of iTunes. And it was like an EP. And I was like, this is cool. I really like this artist. And from that, loved that artist. And I thought, I'm going to create a Florence Machine army. And from building an artist fan page, because I think we were one of the very first fan pages, from doing that as well, back in the day, artist websites used to have forums as well. I think Florence had one, Ellie Goulding had one, and through being a part of the forum, again, I'm 14, right? Like, what else are you going to do after school other than hanging out?
This is exactly how Drone and Sound started, with me being on forums for bands. And stuff,
right. So there was like this whole kind of underlying like forum community of like stans. And like, some of them are now lifelong friends. Like we're still mates. Half of us now work in the industry as well. It's really beautiful to see. Just fast forwarding, jumping from that story, there was a stan that I met on that Florence Machine forum. Fast forward 10 years later, I am backstage at Alexandra Palace with Ella Henderson that I was working with at the time. And I bump into one of those stans that I'd met on the forum who was also working in the industry. She was, I think, working with Jess Glynn or something in management. And well, there we are, just both backstage, just like, this is so wild. Like, who would have thought? So really, that's kind of where the Florence Machine army birthed from. And I started running it. I then brought on a few co-admins, and that page grew. I think it got over to something like over 80,000, 90,000 at its peak on Facebook, garnered the attention of Florence. And through working alongside Florence, kind of giving her essentially free promo, because we were the biggest fan page to echo everything that was going out, all the news, everything. That got picked up by Florence's management. One of the co-admins was due to go out to New York to meet Florence, ended up bailing. So I took his place. And next minute, I'm on a flight out to New York, and Florence is playing a gig in Central Park. We end up swinging some backstage passes to meet her. Couldn't have been nicer. When people like, don't meet your heroes, Florence was just the nicest person in the world. Sat with myself, my mum, Florence and her mum, all sat down drinking cups of tea for like an hour. And then this is kind of the pivotal moment, where I presume we'd have to go back out into the crowd to watch the show. But Florence, being Florence, the wonderful woman she is, she's like, no, hang out side stage. Just meet my family. Like, catering's over there. Like, just go chill, watch the show. All good. Hang out. I was like, okay. And so after the show, the most incredible experience a 15-year-old could possibly receive, I bump into Florence's management. We're just chatting. And, I'm just naive, young, keen. And I was like, look, hey, I think I really, really want to work in the industry one day. Like, if there's anything you need back in London when you guys are back home after tour, let me know. And they're like, yeah, sure. Here's our email. So I was like, boom, direct email secured. And, this is like pre like LinkedIn days, or like where you could stalk people or like find like direct emails. I was just like, sweet, got back home, drop them an email, followed up, kind of a little bit persistent. And then, they put me in touch with Tabitha. Next minute, I'm on London Fashion Week. From there, I then end up getting another job at National Television Awards. I do a bit on Eurovision as well when I was a student. And this is all alongside whilst being a student. I kept having to like leave for like a whole term's worth at one point to go work in Eurovision. I had to skip GCSE exams to go run up to London and like assist Tabitha on stuff. So never did that well academically, but I pretty much just wanted to get as much work under my belt as possible.
Me either. I did a lot of similar things. Like during my A levels, I was running a club night on Thursday nights, so my 9 a.m. Friday meeting was quite hard to get to, and I was like rolling out of the club at 3.
Yeah. It's got to be done. It absolutely is.
But I think also you would have learned so much from running a fan community about what resonates with people, like how much that means to an artist as well, to have someone like caring about the information that's going out in the world about them. Because I guess at that point in time, information was slightly scarcer than it is now, and like building coherent narratives around it, and like that's something that would have been an invaluable education and something you wouldn't have been able to study, like how to run a social campaign for an artist, and understand from the flip side, like some of that press you would have been sharing, like the artist might not have got very much traction from it, or the sites might not have done, but then you suddenly sent a ton of fans to that website. And I don't know, like Drowning Sound or Best Fit would have been a bit like, whoa, our most read thing this week was Florence and the Machine. Like we thought she was like a reasonably up and coming artist. Suddenly it's the most read thing on our website. So all of those things have such a coherent difference to impact. And I think you probably would have learned so many things. Like I remember, like I wanted to study like internet media when I was like 20, and there was no degree I could do. Like the careers advisor was like, oh, you could go to study like communications, or you could go to a media studies degree, but you'd only really be learning about like TV and radio. And I was like, this was at a point where I was like, but my blog's already got like 5,000 readers. Like, why do I want to go learn like about all these other bits of the industry? Anyway, but I think your story, although it's very unique to you, is not unique to the people that I know that have lasted more than 5 years in the industry or 10 years in the industry. I think it's so crucial, that love and fandom of music, because like obviously you're now doing artist management, and you know that sometimes without that love of music, some of it feels like a lot. So let's jump forward a little bit. So you worked at some of the majors for a while, didn't you, in sort of helping artists develop careers, and do you want to do a little hit list of some of the people you worked with?
Yeah, off the top of my head. So if we jump forward, I ended up interning at Sony Music, and they run these internships every year, and it was kind of like an X Factor style boot camp of trying to get an internship over the course of, I think it was like 5 months or something. So the moment that I get the internship was a kind of like a big turning point in my career. It's like, I finally get like a salary paid job, huge. So 18 years old at that point, kind of trot off to London, and it was at Columbia Records. So working, you get thrown straight into it. They call you a marketing intern, but you're pretty much acting the same as if you were a marketing assistant. So you get assigned a roster. You're working across two marketing managers, and that roster was at the time it was an artist, Leon, which is still one of my favorite artists to date. That was the very first EP. We had I worked on Leonard Cohen's last release as well. Before he croaked, bless him. Worked on anything from Judas Priest to Elle King to Ruth B, to The Script, Tom Odell. Trying to think who else we had. I mean, I remember the roster just being ginormous.
Yeah, I don't think people quite realise like how many different artists are on some of those rosters, and sometimes your job is the same job but on a very different campaign. When the my experiences of dealing with people within majors is always fascinating, because unlike someone at an independent where you're kind of digging into doing a bit of everything for a whole campaign, and you sort of only really work with a small pool of artists, like it completely blinds. Like I can't imagine the idea of working on Leonard Cohen 1 minute and The Script the next, but that's quite a normal day for people at major labels, isn't it? It's like
yeah, it is. They're vast, the rosters. I remember one time counting them. I can't remember if it was at Columbia or Island, but I had a roster of over, it was like 45 on average, 40 to 50 I remember, artists. Obviously they're not all in campaign at once, but and I remember one time speaking to a senior marketing manager at Island, and he was just like, we never stop releasing music. It's every week. Like it just doesn't stop for them. Which was insightful. So it's an intense job marketing at a record label.
And with marketing, one of the things that's always surprised me is how much of what goes out on ads and the copy is often press quotes. And I'm starting to wonder, like, is that becoming harder? Is there less of that? Like, I don't know whether, because like, I feel like that's a big thing that the media almost did the copywriting and like contextualization often for people working in marketing to understand, oh, who does this appeal to? What's the demographic? Because being inside of a project, it's not always easy to have that kind of widescreen view of the industry, because like you said, working on as many campaigns as you would have been pretty clued up on most of the things you were working across, but then trying to be clued up on the last 3 to 6 months worth of music that's come out in the last 50 to 100 years worth of music, to put music into context like a lot of journalists are. Like that's a huge task. So to what extent do you remember feeling like press quotes were quite a big part of that, like, or were they not a big part of it?
Yeah, I think, when I was at labels, that was always a big part of it. I remember majority of our artists at Columbia and Island, they all had access to publicists. You have a dedicated promo and press team in-house, and then you would also have certain artists that were out-of-house press and promo. So I remember it always being quite a big thing. I remember part of my job in marketing would actually also be pulling press quotes myself to put on what we call one sheets, which is, I guess, kind of the equivalent to what most people refer to them as EPKs, but more condensed. And we would always include that.
And now they've just become the Spotify playlist pitch.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, exactly. Who else are you pitching to? And I remember as well, we would put together like tube poster adverts for albums, and we would always pull press quotes for that. Again, I think more to give it the credibility. But that was always like the done thing. It was like, oh, you're putting an ad together, especially if it's kind of, a physical ad, like a billboard, insert press quotes, right? 4 stars, 5 stars. It was just like what everyone did. And actually, now I think about it, I was on the tube the other day and I was thinking, yeah, I'm starting to see less press quotes. I think I was looking at a Georgia Smith album, tube billboard, and I was thinking it's just looking a little empty. So I needed to go and double check, see if they've included any quotes on that, but I have a feeling they haven't.
I always found tube ads quite weird because often they don't even make it clear that it's an album they're advertising. Like I remember they were advertising the XX once, and all it had was the 2 X's and then the date, and I was like, but if you've never heard of the XX, that advert's not had any impact on you. That is literally only advertising to people that are in the club and knowing who they are.
Exactly.
Anyway, it's a whole separate thing. So a year ago, you started doing coaching alongside artist management. Do you want to just I just was be curious, if you can think, was there a moment where it started to feel like conversations around press became less important? But obviously now that you're like, I think with management, one of the things that I find, especially for like venues and promoters, like they still want, can you send us through the cuttings or some quotes so that they can use it when they're promoting shows. I'm just curious whereabouts you feel like the role of press has been in the past and whereabouts you kind of feel like it might be now.
Yeah. I think the bottom line really is budget for so many of them. And the reason why I started coaching is because having worked in a very major record label world, Columbia Records, Island Records, and then management of two major recording artists, everything is to some extent obviously a lot easier because you get plugged in, your press, your TV pluggers, your radio pluggers. You have the budget to do that, so it's a no-brainer. But when it comes down to independent music, the reason why I started coaching is because I got on TikTok and I just started talking about my job just because I had a bit of time on my hands. I'd quit my job in management. I was just hanging out, and then I realized everyone was commenting, "This is so helpful. We need this. And I was like, shit, there's not that many people in the thick of the industry essentially kind of pulling back the curtain and go, well, this is actually how it's done. And so few artists can get a foot in the door and they don't even know who to go to. And it's the lack of education as well.
One of the big things is, until you need to do something, a lot of artists haven't ever really considered it. And
yeah, exactly.
So, and managers and various other people on the team, like, you're only going to have your career once. So unless you've had the luck of being across a few different careers, and I think also the industry's changed so much. Like I last released an album in 2013, and that was for Ed Harcourt, and like CD sales were really crucial and central to everything. Like your ship to HMV and Amazon was still probably the most important part of the campaign. Like streaming had obviously taken off, but the process of pitching for playlists was still a bit random. But now it's like, didn't release any records because I worked at the BBC for a while. And then suddenly it's like, oh, so what's the marketing spend? Not what press have you got or what radio plays happening. It's like, how much are you spending and where are you spending it? And it's like, well, I wasn't planning to spend hardly anything. I was hoping that the music's strong. The artist has already got an audience. And that feels like such a big change to me. And
it's massive. Yeah.
I think a lot of the knowledge that I end up imparting, on different things that I do, is often just about helping artists tell their story. And I think that bit hasn't changed. I think the big change is, like, Self-Esteem spoke about it last year, about essentially having to interview herself endlessly to create social content. Whereas years ago, she would have been doing promo days. People would have been asking her smart questions. Those prompts would have then become nice press quotes or things that people read, or she'd be on a TV show or radio show talking about the music. And now that the media ecosystem has become self-generated media rather than, which is in a way is a good thing, but in the other way is like the amount of musicians I talk to that are struggling with their mental health and body dysmorphia and all sorts of things, where sitting on camera is not healthy for them. And also it's not always convenient just to flick your camera out and start chatting into it. You're clearly very good at it and you know what you're doing with that. But I think this monologue is not really headed anywhere apart from to kind of like, I think it's so important, a lot of what you're saying, because someone having a huge amount of time investment and money investment in things that they think they should be doing, possibly based on advice that's 5 to 10 years old, is not very helpful right now. And I think exactly that's one of the reasons why a lot of what you say really resonates on TikTok, especially. But yeah, I'm looking at where the press is right now, and I know how economically challenging it is to run a publication and how hard it is to be a writer right now. But I also know how much artists care, and like, you're spending money on press offices and they come back and they've got you 2 bits of press for that £1,500 single campaign. And that doesn't feel like very much when you used to literally be able to weigh the press kit because there would be so much in it. So I guess I'm really curious whereabouts, when you're advising artists right now, like whereabouts do you think they should be investing their time and money? Because although those two things are often related, like whereabouts do you would sort of advise most of the time?
Yeah. So for most, I would say the first thing, the most important thing is your audience, is your fans at this point, because that's your leverage. And if you need anything in the industry, it's leverage to go up and up and up. Because most want to secure managers or live agents or deals, or they don't just want to be throwing their music out into the abyss of like 700,000 other tracks every week on Spotify. So you have to kind of look at the core problem, which is what I do with my artists that I coach. And I go, okay, what do you want? And then they tell me what they want. Okay, everything I've just said. Okay, so audience wise, where you're at, how are you building your audience? And they go, yeah, well, I'm posting every now and again. I'm like, okay. So then you pretty much zoom in and in and in to figure out how does that artist build their audience. And I think because also I'm in the trenches with them, right? I'm building something as well myself. Although it's a business, I'm not an artist. The two,
Yep.
you can cross that over. It's, for anyone, anyone can build anything on TikTok now. And I've managed to build my own business off of TikTok, and I haven't spent a penny on any advertising at all. It's been the cheapest thing I've ever built. So I know it is doable. It's completely possible. That also being said, right, social media, no, it doesn't float for every single artist, and it pains me because I have to go on coaching calls and say, look, I wish I could turn around and say, yeah, you can put your music out and, pitch it to press and, pitch it to radio, and that's going to move the needle. But it's just not going to move the needle as fast as if you were to allocate that time, energy, and spend on your socials, your digital marketing. And if it's reach and engagement that you need to build that core audience, who are essentially going to be the people to follow you and convert into ticket sales, to merch sales, to streams organically, if that's what you want, which is for most people, because it is the most important thing.
Yep.
Because if you get a core audience, you can monetize that, and then you can turn that into however you want to monetize it, Patreon or gigs or hangouts or like merch, whatever you want to do, but you can monetize it. So then you can then turn that audience to make a living off of your music, which is for most as well kind of the main goal also. And so the way I have to look at it is really like, what do these artists want, and how do you get it? How do you get there in the most sustainable and really cheapest way? Ultimately, it's going to come down to budget for most of them. And it is still possible to do it, but we live in a content visual world now. We're seeing, even Spotify, which is a music streaming app, introduce clips, which is a video. So I think you have to look at it and go, you can either play ball with the industry and what is available in today's world, or you can bury your head and say, actually, I'm not gonna play ball. I'm not gonna do this. I'm not gonna venture down and build something. The way I look at it is social media is an opportunity. It's not everybody's favorite. It is tough. Even I struggle. Even I have to take some time out and go touch the grass, go for a walk. So that's on you to build your own boundaries with it. But the reason I jumped on TikTok a year ago is because I'm surrounded by YouTubers. A lot of my friends are YouTubers who picked up a camera 10 years ago. And I have my YouTube friends who are buying houses with their YouTube money. And they just took action on an opportunity 10 years ago. And so what's happening with TikTok is pretty much that second wave. So those who take action on TikTok, you got to ask yourself, if I just do this now and build something and jump on this opportunity, where will I be sitting in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years plus? And that's the long-term goal you got to think about.
Because I think those stories of the successes that people have had on platforms that are now, I guess, the creator economy, rather than, because like YouTube should be the platform where musicians are telling their stories alongside their music videos. And it always surprises me that it's not actually that easy to do, and I hardly ever see any artists do it. And if you do start to put that type of content out, it doesn't tend to do that well, because I think the stuff that engages and travels, like for instance, you educating people on how the industry works, fits within that kind of slightly more journalistic, inform, educate, entertain, obviously like the BBC's kind of main way of doing things. And I think if you're an artist, unless you've got a concept around your album that you can talk about in depth, or unless you've got a special interest that's maybe not music that sort of overlaps, but a lot of the musician content that I see goes out, it's mostly people talking about, I've got something, like obviously you get the crap, like I've got a new track out, stream it. But I think increasingly artists that are making music without a clear purpose, even to them, becomes unclearer to the world, and they've got less to talk about. And I keep thinking back to, well, it's always was a bit like that. If you weren't very interesting in interviews, the feature would only be a half-page feature and not a 3-page feature. If you weren't a very visually inspiring artist, then like some of the first acts I worked with, we got loads of press because they had great press shots. Like I worked with an artist called George Pringle, and she just literally had GarageBand Until I Die written eyeliner down her arm, and she was really cool. And but we got in like the tech section of the Guardian because of this GarageBand photo, and the understanding the medium is so crucial. And I think a lot of people think that if you treat social media like an instrument and then you have to learn how to play it, like I think a lot of artists think, well, I understood how to use Twitter and Facebook, I just posted information and that was enough. And I think now we've shifted into this is essentially crafting, and it does require getting the right mindset and working with someone like you, I imagine, to even drill down on who they are in the first place, because I think even without that self-awareness that this is who I am and this is the story I've got and I can tell, and only I can tell, and this is who it might connect to, and this is how I have to keep retelling that story in slightly different ways to see whether it's going to cut through. I think that's, would you say that's quite a lot of what you do? And
yeah, that's exactly it. That's and this is kind of the sort of through line that is ultimately why I think a lot of artists end up hating social media, is because they jump on social media because they see everybody else doing it and feeling like they have to do it to be a part of the noise, because that's the way to grow an audience. And that's what the industry is constantly telling the artists, right? Get on TikTok, get on shorts, get on reels. So they get on reels, shorts, TikTok, and they just get on these platforms and post anything and everything. And they're just posting for the sake of posting without any real strategy or research or education as to, okay, what I find is like you can have the idea, but if you aren't executing it well to play ball and speak the TikTok language or speak the YouTube Shorts language, of course you're not going to do so well on these platforms. And it's kind of unpacking that for every single artist, which is why I can't offer one set flat advice, because it has to be tailored to every single artist, and I have to sit them down and go, okay, first of all, what do you enjoy? Because it has to be enjoyable showing up on social media. Otherwise, you're never going to stay consistent, and you can't have quality without consistency. You kind of need the two together in order to grow something. I could post one amazing, great video that I think is really quality and then leave the platform for 2 weeks. And there's a direct correlation of my growth dipping. It's, and I have this conversation with my YouTube friends who've done this for 10 years plus. And when I started TikTok and I turned around, I was like, so I just have to keep making TikToks until the day I die now? Like, what's the end goal here? What are we all doing here? But really, I think it's that kind of sitting an artist down and going, okay, what makes you you? What do you enjoy? What's your seat at the table, right? Why are people going to hit the follow button? What's going to make your audience consistently come back to your page? And again, there's pros and cons to all of it. I think there's, I look at social media now as a great opportunity to build an audience that you can then monetize and change your life. But I also see the negative effects of it, of burnout and disappointment. And my job, especially as a coach, but also artist manager, is I'm forever having to align artist expectations with this. I just had an artist go, yeah, I put out a song, but it didn't do what I thought I wanted it to do. And I immediately went back and I said, what do you want? What were your expectations? What did you think it would do? And did you put in the work to ensure that you got X, Y, and Z results? And there's so much that goes into achieving what you want, to avoid disappointment, to avoid burnout. And that's why I, as a coach and manager, have to constantly go, okay, let's align your expectations, because disappointment really is just expectations not met. And so there's almost this whole mental aspect to it.
In amongst that, though, a lot of musicians are not in the fortunate position where it's their full-time job. And I do worry a lot. And obviously there's been a lot written over the years about how only really the wealthy can start to develop a career. I just wonder to what extent that burnout is doubled when you've got another job or another two jobs, or you're touring and everything else that's time consuming. Like I guess my next question really was, what platforms need to exist, and is there almost in like, my theory is that vinyl's had its moment in the last few years, and I think magazines will again, because I think audiences aren't necessarily being satiated by social media to find new music to discover, or even find out that the artist they really like is about to tour or has a new album coming out. And I think magazines will have another moment. I mean, I believe that in my heart. I don't believe that based on any data and science. But I have seen in other industries print start to feel like it's more important again. And I just wonder, like, in terms of digital platforms, like, I don't feel like a lot of these platforms are built with musicians in mind. Like, they're not like Instagram, for instance. Most of its new features are for creators, not necessarily for musicians. A lot of what's great about TikTok is for experts, not necessarily for musicians. And music's core to TikTok, but actually if you removed what really works on there, it's people using music to soundtrack moments and people using their voice to tell stories. And although music does both of those things, for a lot of artists that's not the thing that they're good at or natural at. And like, so I think we've got this like dual pronged problem of people with extraordinary confidence and personality being great at TikTok, people with some amazing knowledge as well being really great at TikTok, but then you've got people that can afford the time and resource to get good at TikTok. And I don't know, I feel like there's a lot broken at the moment, and I would be curious whether you agree that things are broken, and what you feel would potentially be a slightly better thing to come next. So that's two very complicated questions you could probably write an entire essay about. Yeah. So I'd just be curious what platforms you feel would be better to come next, and whether you feel like a renaissance of the music press would be a useful faction in that or not.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I don't think these platforms are necessarily artist friendly at all. I mean, at the moment, even as an artist manager, right, I'm releasing a song with my artist Christina Hart. We're going through a new distributor, and even trying to pre-tease the audio clip that we have delivered to the distributor. You'll put up a TikTok, immediately we'll get strike as a copyright, and the sound will get blocked. You've got to manually whitelist it. I mean, it's a total nightmare, and I completely see all the frustration, because I've got Christina there going, why is the industry telling me to tease my music out on TikTok? And I go and do it, and I literally cannot physically do it because of my distributor. And it's like, the two just don't seem to work in harmony. And then on top of that, yeah, like you said, I mean, I do feel like on TikTok, anyone is actually able to build an audience. However, there are so many musicians on TikTok all pretty much doing the same thing. And it's the musicians coming through TikTok, literally going through, as you know, and that's where now I discover most of the artists. You know, you got David Kushner, like Connor Price. There's a new artist, actually. I just put 2 of her songs in my SoundCloud, in my Spotify. She's called Erin LeCount. She's got like 7,000 Spotify monthly listeners, but found her on TikTok, and I was like, this girl's awesome. Got Dan Whitlam as well, I've just discovered. There are loads out there, but the issue is the majority of artists do approach TikTok and they all end up doing the same thing. They all end up jumping on TikTok and just immediately promoting and selling. But actually, TikTok is about building your value and what that looks like. And that is a whole other beast in itself. And that
Because I
can
think
be hard when it's not.
if you flip that idea of value around, though, by that what you really mean is providing something that's nourishing for the person watching it. Like it's something that you valued their time by giving them an insight or giving them a kind of perspective on life that they wouldn't have got if they didn't. Because that's the thing, we always forget that people are often opening the apps because they want 15 minutes of distraction, or they want half an hour of comfort of just being within humanity and like the conversations that you might have in a pub, like, or an idea you might have half had once someone's kind of made real and kind of made more sense of than you ever could have done. And I think that's a really difficult thing, to sit there, a microphone and a computer, and suddenly go, right, I'm gonna start chatting about this thing.
Yeah, and that's it, and I feel for the artists where it doesn't come naturally, and I sit a lot of artists down and I say, look, if you don't feel comfortable showing up and talking to camera, don't do it. The ultimate shit, due to seeing so many people get on TikTok and blow up in a week, and go viral, and that is just not the case for most. And so it's almost having to just
lots of people going viral.
That.
It doesn't convert into something anyway.
It doesn't mean anything. Yeah. And I find myself repeating myself so many times. I'm like, don't chase virality. It really doesn't mean anything if you can't convert people into real human fans. Because that's what I care about as an artist manager. I don't care if you're sitting at 500,000 followers if you can't convert that into streams or ticket sales. Like that means nothing. It's hollow. I think the good thing as well, just to go back on your point about kind of the renaissance of music press, I was chatting to a few other artist manager friends who kind of the general chat at the moment in the industry is that a lot of labels or a lot of industry in general are wanting to go back to the music, whereas they have notoriously been focusing on TikTok following, or, if a song blows up on TikTok, you're signed to a major just like that. And thrown to the wall. And that has happened now on a kind of larger scale across predominantly the majors, but also label services. I'd be having conversations with label services and they literally just want to look at your stats and will base your advance off of that. And it sucks because you have artists, even the artists that I manage, who have the music, they have it all there. They have the branding, they have that core audience there. It's just not at a mass level. And we're too far along to just not have a team. We need the wider team, but we need the cash injection. And it's all these artists at the middle ground that just can't get in because they don't have any, like you said, time, resources, money, team to push them up to the next level. And I think that's the actual worst point, because I think below that, you still have all artists kind of still figuring out their sound, still networking away, still figuring out their branding, still figuring out, all of that. But it's this middle tier of artists that I'm looking at where so many coming through but cannot get through because no one will offer a handout to go, actually, I get it, and I'm just going to champion you and offer you that leg up. Sophie will do it. And so I think until we see a change go, you know what, we need to get back to the music. Then
because I think that's the thing that
sorry. Has a chance.
I think that's the thing that the press used to do, was to give that boost. Like I remember seeing like bands play like Madame Jojo's. Like when I saw Foals play to almost no one, and then they got a good review with us and a good review somewhere else, and then more people piled in to see them play our Candom Crawl stage, and you could see people were finding the band, liking what they heard. And I don't know where those boosters are now, because like obviously radio is still pretty key for that. Like I worked at Six Music for years, and you could see the difference when Six Music really got behind an artist and their shows would suddenly tour sold out, like records selling really well, featured in all the independent record stores, social channels, and I just wonder whether what the music press was, at least some of it, conceptually the kind of editorial, like you, I was a 14, 15-year-old. Like my first job was working in a record shop. Like it was my dream summer job. And I must have gone back in 3 times after I'd given my CV in to see if they still needed anyone. And then I started doing a fanzine, and then I started Drowning Sound, and I started putting club nights on, and I started doing like gigs when I moved to London, and it, to me, was all the things that I felt compelled to do. And I've really cared about finding good things with potential. But also there's loads of things I like that I wouldn't always recommend and push to the fore, because I know that it's not necessarily going to connect to the audience as much. And like I've had weird things, like there's loads of people that think the only bands I really like are Paramore in the 1975, and it's like, well, for both of those acts have been very successful, and the Kaiser Chiefs because I released one of their singles, and it's like, and then I turn around and go, yeah, but you got into this like Alluvium drone album because of me championing it. They're like, oh yeah, but I didn't really think about that as your music taste. And it's like, you got into Phoenix because we made them album of the year, and M83 and like Wild Beast and like all these acts that we championed over the years, Sharon Van Etten and St. Vincent, and like first piece of press Santigold ever had was Drowning Sounds, but the week after I think it was Bon Iver. And it's like we were very consistent in our recommendations. And I think, I don't know, I don't really have questions at the moment. I've got lots of concerns and fears, and I think it's really hard for new artists, which I imagine is probably the consistent thing that you are finding.
Yeah, across the board. And I think both of us have mentioned the word consistency or consistent a lot, and that's truly it, really. And that goes against everything, like press being consistent with who they decide to champion, radio being consistent. I have to be consistent with any service or brand that I recommend my artists go to, because it all comes back to that person that's connecting. Artists have to be consistent in how they show up online, the music they're making. It really is that. But yeah, I think, I don't know, I would love obviously to see the return of music press, but I think we need the consumers to be reading it more, and until we have the weight of eyes and ears on more blogs, or even, people buying magazines, like I used to love buying Enemy, but that's gone. So it's until we have the weight of more audiences reading press, then press will then become almost like that go-to where you got a bit of press and it would actually be quite pivotal. But now it's become more of a strategy almost to go, should we strategically spend our money on press, because we can then use that bit of press as leverage for all of the other conversations we're having. And at what point in the artist's career do we need to invest in press? And that's kind of the undertone of it. Whereas, pre-pandemic, even 10 years back, it would be like a no-brainer. It's like, obviously we can pitch to press. So again, it's wild. It honestly is wild at the moment. Music in general is in such a weird space. The industry is in such a weird space. I look at it now that like any artist has a chance, whereas again, 5 years ago, I don't think it was like that so much. And I think every artist has a chance to not essentially rely on labels or wider audiences if they crack social media. But at the same time, there are artists that just will never crack social media because they just don't get it, or they won't want to spend the time getting better at it.
Or they're only
and that's
appealing
going
to a
to lead to
niche.
burnout and disappointed.
Or they're only going to appeal to a niche, and finding that niche on a social platform is even harder than finding a mass. And it's the I guess it's like one of the things I sent you in my notes was like, every time you create a piece of content on TikTok, you're competing with Beyonce and Dua Lipa, and you're competing with Mr. Beast, and you're competing with some stupid meme, and that's just you putting out stuff that's already resonating. So I feel like, the existential doom spiral can continue, and that's probably how we should end.
Great. I know. I feel like every time I go and do a podcast, that's kind of where we end up, because it's like, I wish I could come on a podcast and go, yeah, it's going to be, everyone's going to win. But it really is putting a lot of pressure on everyone. Obviously, it feels like there is a race. There's such a race to get attention every single day from someone.
I think the fact that we've hit such a kind of point means that either people are going to invest in a new type of platform, or the industry is going to change its strategy. Because I think the understanding of the value of certain things, and I realize we've used the word value in a few different contexts today, but like trying to connect an artist to an audience doesn't necessarily feel like an algorithm is the best way to do that. And I think that's the bit that's slightly broken. And like, if the industry can start to find different, and I know that the industry as a whole is like a big tanker and it's not going to change, but I think if artists start to change the approach of how they release their music, where they might place their storytelling, like hardly any musicians have podcasts, but they collectively could all be chatting to each other, building each other's audiences up. Like, I remember when there was like a massive race of people doing compilation albums, because that suddenly put you in amongst a load of other audiences. Collaborations have obviously been a big thing of the last decade, of cross-pollinating audiences on streaming. And like, from every nadir, we start to see like a new thing build. But at the moment, I don't know anyone that's seeing those seeds of change. They're seeing the dirty, burnt ground, but they're not seeing what might grow out of it. So, which I think is sometimes an exciting moment. So I think, even though it sounded like we're ending on a negative.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, more doom and gloom. Yeah, I don't want artists to listen to this and think there's no hope, because there is. And I think you have to look out and remember, look at all the artists that have come through TikTok already. And really, TikTok still is kind of in its infancy. It's still just, it's only still baby years. We're not double digits yet. I think there's still room to grow, but it still feels a little bit open-ended as to what is the industry going to be in the next 5 years. And that's hard to tell. But then again, I kind of, it's easy to fall into like sort of doom. But then if you think about it, we've always had this ongoing conversation of, the industry's changing. We must adapt. And then next minute there's a global pandemic, and then we must adapt. And now there's TikTok, and we must adapt. And then there's the metaverse and AI. And it's just, there's always going to be something that we have to move fast with.
And not
which
break
is why I'm a
things.
big advocate for, not break things. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But that's why I'm a big advocate for like up-to-date knowledge and education, because then you know how to almost manipulate it to your own advantage as an artist. Like, okay, if there's this new opportunity happening in the world that's going to affect the industry, how can I get on board with this now to smash it and build an opportunity for myself? And I'm
going to end it there. That's your last word.
Yeah, that's I guess that's what I'm ultimately trying to achieve, I suppose. I don't, but like, yeah, it's a wild west of an industry, isn't it, out there? But I think that's ultimately comes back to our first point. You have to love it. You have to love it in order to stay doing it. And it's long game mentality always with all of this.
That is the perfect way to end. Thank you so much for your time.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. See the program description for more about Atlanta's consultancy work and the link to her TikTok. This was part of Season 2 of the Drowned in Sound podcast about the future of the music press. It was hosted, produced, researched, and lightly edited by Sean Adams. We'll see you again soon.